Hello and welcome to another episode of Nutanix Weekly, our XenTegra podcast with context, as we like to call them. We call them that because we try to bring the real world alongside of the theoretical and the technical information that we're getting from our vendors, in this case, our friends at Nutanix. Today I've got a pretty special episode. I'm joined with someone that's inside of the Nutanix ecosystem, a good partner of both XenTegra and Nutanix, and that's our friends over at HYCU. If HYCU's not a name that you've found yourself familiar with, well, let's get a little quick introduction. So today I've got Subbiah, and I should have got Subbiah, yeah. And I apologize for butchering your name, but Subbiah from HYCU. Subbiah has been with the company since the beginning. From what I understand, project manager. But Subbiah, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Phil. Very happy to be here, Phil. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Also, XenTegra is a great partner. Thank you very much for working with us on this entire journey. HYCU itself, personally about myself first, let me start. It's again Subbiah Sundaram. I run products for HYCU, based out of Boston. And when we say product, it's the product management, the marketing, the customer success, and solutions engineering, and so on. So that's alliances and so on. That's what I do for the organization. One of the things I love the most, Phil, about my job is I get the chance to talk to a lot of customers. That's something I love the most. And that's the most pleasurable part of my job. And get to work with very smart engineers on the other side to build solutions which customers love. That's a part of me.
Well, Subbiah, it's great to have you here. You know, we've been a longtime HYCU partner, and that's by virtue of our work together with Nutanix. You know, as listeners have heard us talk about many times, we do lots of things in the Nutanix space. Our managed service practice is 100% based on Nutanix today. And we've also got managed services with you at HYCU. We do backup as a service. We store that on Nutanix Unified Storage. But that's the really genesis of our story together is backup and recovery specifically built for the Nutanix platform. Mm-hmm. Nutanix existed for a while, and then you really filled this space first. So what's the elevator pitch for HYCU for a listener who doesn't know you?
Thank you, Phil. So I'll probably tell you, this goes back to early days. I don't know, as many customers, some of your customers and listeners might remember, Nutanix actually was started, and they supported the end user computing. They supported VMware, doing very well. And at some point, they decided to support AHV, the Acropolis hypervisor, right? Acropolis hypervisor was a young platform, and they didn't actually have a good data protection solution for it for a while. And a lot of their customers were asking for a good solution. And that's when we partnered with Nutanix, and we're very fortunate to have a great partner like Nutanix work with us. And we said, we will build a solution for you. We were the first data protection solution built for Nutanix AHV. That is something which was unique at that time. And even today, I'll tell you, today, hands down, I'm a product guy. I can tell you this is the best solution for Nutanix, right? And people say, why is that? You know, when we started building it, right, if you go back to our history, our team has at least worked on 8 different backup products. People say, really? So what's the benefit of working on that, right? We know all the mistakes people made. We know all the problems, and we want to do something, start clean. That's why we started this thing, right? So that's one of the reasons we said, let's do clean. We also looked at one of the beauty of working with Nutanix is that Nutanix, if you look at it as a platform, they entirely dramatically simplify the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. We want to do the exact same thing from a backup perspective. We said we want to make how they made backup simple. Infrastructure simple. We want to make backup the same as like people say using an iPhone, like Dheeraj Pandey used to love to say that example. Very similar. We said, how do you make backup as simple as that? That's what got us initiated. So early days, we worked with the Nutanix team on building their APIs, making sure all the right set of APIs are there, things like that, on starting with AHV. Then we did the same thing for Nutanix Files. We were the first one to actually help build. We even worked with them on designing the set of APIs to make sure it is truly built for the next generation. I'll tell you a funny story. When we started building the NDMP, Nutanix Files backup, everybody said, "Oh, so you're going to do NDMP?" I said, like, "Why would you do NDMP?" NDMP, for most people who are not familiar, this is the protocol used for NAS backup for many, many years. Yeah. It was built 20 plus years ago for tape. It was great for tape. But today, do you tape? How many customers use tape? It's probably 5% of the customer base, right? Not 94% don't use it. You want to build for next generation. That's why we were very fortunate to have a chance to work with people like Nutanix, who were also thinking ahead and trying to say, how could we build a next generation solution? So that's what started. We started in the entire journey. We started building a lot of cool things. And even today, we say we are the first and only in many, many of Nutanix technologies. And we have the complete coverage of the portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, that was the great thing for us. We were talking a bit before we started our podcast today, but, us being in the EUC space, we really love the Nutanix platform because we can do, profiles, user data, and the virtual machines to run EUC all in the same platform. And so almost every one of our customer deployments includes files. And, that was a great thing for us, simplify the way that we do that, the life cycle, and the same thing from backup. Gives us a way of protecting all of that in a really integrated way with HYCU. You mentioned the firsts. You've actually had some more firsts recently.
Absolutely.
As of a couple of weeks ago, we were at .next, the Nutanix event in Barcelona, and you uncovered some new announcements there as well.
Totally, Phil. I'm very excited about it. So one of the things we pride ourselves, right? I probably a little bit of bragging here. I'll tell you, one of the things we always love to do is that with Nutanix, the great partnership. People say, how do you see the value of the partnership? The value of the partnership at the end of the day is, are we adding value to customers, right? That's what a partnership value itself is. That is something we have been able to demonstrate day in and day out. In the sense that Nutanix team, whenever they come up with a new technology, when they come up with new innovation, they reach out to us, say, "Hey guys, how do you think we're going to help customers?" That is something we have done for many. I talked about AHV, talked about files. Right. Same thing when they came up with Nutanix clusters on Azure, on AWS, and things like that. We were the first one to support it, because that shows that, how do you support your partner? Try to be along with them at right get-go. That's what it is. Same thing, as when they started working on Nutanix Database, their NDB, many, many years ago, a few years ago, they started working on that particular one. At that time, we were there working with them early on. And they built an integrated solution, which is fantastic for customers as they try to build a database, the AWS style database, clicking a button and immediately spinning up a new database, things like that. That's the power they brought to a customer controlled instance, right? Which is fantastic. Now the question is, how do you keep it protected? The good job was that NDB itself keeps a lot of snapshot, but at the end of the day, we have large financial customers, banking customers. I'll tell you some of the Nutanix's largest customers, and they said, "Guys, we have all this data and managed by NDB. We got to keep a good backup copy of it, just in case, at the end of the day, Murphy's Law applies and bad things happen. So you got to make sure you have your data backed up. And you have compliance needs, as you know, with many of the financial institutions, they have so many of them. So that's the first thing they said, can you actually help us protect that? And that's what it is. We worked with the Nutanix team. We're the first one to have a very clean single-click backup of NDB. We integrate with the NDB infrastructure. We understand when NDB does its backup. We complement what they do. And that is something, as you point out, right in the blog, people can actually check it out a lot more detail. Very happy to talk about it. But this, again, for a customer, allows them to have good copies of their database outside of their production infrastructure as a good best practice. People always know this thing. It's always good to have a copy outside just in case something bad happens.
Absolutely.
So that's something there. That's the first one I probably will say. That's the first thing.
Yeah, and the NDB, you go back to what you're saying about simplified operations, right? The goal of HYCU is to make it simpler to operate. It's and for people unfamiliar, HYCU is a virtual appliance, so you couldn't get easier than a virtual appliance from a deployment standpoint, and it's easier to upgrade. There's no disparate software components and add-ons and different. It is a self-contained virtual appliance for your Nutanix infrastructure. Makes it very simple to both get started and maintain. And then you support so many different back-end storage technologies on top of it. So it's really up to the customer to choose, right? They have a lot of choice. You empower that, and it's simplistic. For NDB, the one-click data protection, what's really driving that? I guess, what are you leveraging to be able to do that in such a simplistic way?
Absolutely. Let me I'll give you one thing. I'll double click on the NDB before that. I want to give one analogy, one real world example of what you were talking about, the simplicity, right? Yeah. When we actually originally introduced our solution and we launched it and we made it easy for people to try. There's a thing called tryhycu.com, tryhycu.com. People can go click on it and get the bits and imply it, right? It was very simple. You know what happened the day after we launched the solution? We saw a video on YouTube. It's like, ooh, what's that video about HYCU? One of our partners based in Morocco, what they did was they downloaded the HYCU. This person didn't know English. So what he did was he downloaded HYCU, took the entire raw capture video, right? End to end, from the download to deploy to actually set up the backup to do the first test backup to recovery. Everything in 17 minutes, end to end, raw, waiting for the download to happen. Everything he took capture and put it. I said, like, one part of me is like, oh my God, there's no voice. But then the other part is that's a perfect example of a demonstration of simplicity, right? Within 17 minutes, you have end to end, fully up and running, a full production backup there. So anyway, coming back to what you were talking about NDB, the thing which, one of the things, as you know, with NDB, the beauty of NDB is that they support a wide range of databases. Yeah. And they leverage the good thing they have done is that integrated with the database technology for consistency and also integrate with the Nutanix snapshot technology they have actually done, right? So what we end up doing is that, as you know very well, Phil, is that we also actually support a wide range of databases, be it Microsoft SQL, Postgres, MongoDB. People run a variety of databases. We support them. Similarly, so what we work with is Nutanix is to make sure we coordinate with them. We understand the database is managed by NDB, so that because the key thing here is that we're dealing with databases and transaction logs and things like that. So we have to do the right thing across the board. So we auto discover the NDB instances which are running NDB. We know how to actually back it up. Those are things which we said the customer should not have to deal with. The system should automatically discover, manage, protect everything. And then we should show you right in our UI automatically. And you just say, protect it, and we should do everything behind the scene. Sometimes people think it's crazy, but that's the reality. You got to make it simple, and it should happen magically behind the scene. The only time you should care is at the time of recovery, and you should actually get it. So that's what we want to make it happen, and that's what we have done.
Yeah, it's cool when it's simple. Sometimes they don't make the best demonstrations, though, because you just click the button, right? And it's maybe too easy. But you're doing a lot of complicated stuff behind the scenes for the customer. So I'm going to assume this is probably policy driven as well when you do the protection.
Totally. Yeah. 100%. I think that's a good question, Phil. The key thing here at HYCU, one thing we believe is that anything which is repeated, it means we have wasted the customer's time. So we should want to automate everything as possible. That's when we believe in policy management. Some of the people think, oh, we have policy management, but they have 7 different policies to do one task. I said, you complicated life. Come up with one thing and make it as simple as possible in customer's language. I'll give you what do I mean by that. We should just ask you a simple set of questions which you have agreed with your business. A simple thing like in the world of backup, as you know, the retention, how often you want to back up, and how much time you have to recover. Understand that, and HYCU should do the rest. For example, one of the things in HYCU, there's no setting up jobs or retention, things like that. For people who have used traditional backup, when they come here, they initially get lost. They say, oh, what do you mean there's no retention? Why can't I control all the schedules? Why do you have to do that? Because we take care of it for you, Mr. Customer. That's sometimes people have to unlearn. They say, let the system do it. It'll take care of it. The good thing is that it's done without any impact of production, things like that. So, and working with a smart system like Nutanix, you can automate a lot of these things behind the scene completely for customers.
Yeah, I think coming from an operational background, you set up the jobs and then you run into issues where the job's running during the day and it's causing a disruption, or you're having this, or you have a lot of those issues are resolved today. They've gone away. And so the traditional pushback from your operations teams, not necessarily real concerns in today's infrastructure when we're talking about Nutanix. Snapshots take instantaneously. Totally. You're leveraging the underlying data services and things like that in the Nutanix platform. So the smarts is the simplistic approach, right?
Totally on that particular one. So one of the things which I actually, the next thing you're going there, Phil, I want to actually probably also talk about a slightly different this one there, right? As you clearly know, as more and more customers deploying the next generation workloads, when we originally started with object storage, as most people know here, it was originally people treated as a secondary storage, as an archive tier,
sure.
The low end, right? That was the primary thing. But off late, what we are starting to see is that especially customers running modern workloads, as well as the next generation application. For example, one of our customers, I'll give you a real example. One of our customers who is an insurance company, for them, they keep a lot of the data in the database. But all their images they scan as part of their insurance policies and things like that, you could imagine, all that is kept in object storage, right? And for them, that's a tier one data, meaning it's a production data, right? If you lose that particular scans, man, your policyholder is not going to be happy, right? Because that's generally kept in a separate database, not on this one. And in their world, it's kept in object storage, and they needed to protect it. That's one example of customer, right? There are a lot of other customers. That's one example. The other example is that today, when people write applications in Kubernetes and things like essentially container-based applications, things like that, as you well know, people keep the data in object storage as their primary tier. So now the question comes down to is that, do you need to protect it? The answer is yes, because now that's your production data. You better have a second copy somewhere else at a minimum, just as a safety measure, right? And that is something people have asked us. And that's why we added support for Nutanix objects. And this is something we used to do in the public clouds because people knew that earlier. In our on-prem or in the hybrid cloud world right now, as more and more customers using object, they wanted that. And similar to what we did for Nutanix Files, now we have added for Nutanix objects. So you can protect it either in a different Nutanix object system, or could be on the public cloud. Either way, we can actually do that. And that is something which we do out of the box for Nutanix objects.
Yeah, Nutanix objects is something interesting because a lot of customers think of that as the place where backups go to. It's their target, right? That's often the first thing that customers are thinking about with object store is, they may have something where they're tiering it off to a Wasabi or maybe to S3 or something like that. So that's their first iteration of using object store is to store backups. But you're right, like the game is changing. So much of what got unpacked last week or 2 weeks ago at Nutanix.next was really around next generation cloud native architecture, Kubernetes, orchestrating that. And at the end of the day, the data is what's important. Yes, the application's important. You can cache things, but this new style, you need somewhere that has data persistence as well. So object store fits that bill because it's scale out. You can make multiple regional copies of things. It's architected in a way where disaster recovery is sort of built in because it's distributed. And so new cloud native applications are going to be distributed. You need a place to store that data. Object store is a great choice because it's also distributed. But now to your point, your tier one data is there. And so you have this protection need. It's a little bit of a tangent, but for anyone listening that's not familiar with your company, I do want to take an opportunity. You brought up the fact that you were protecting cloud native object. it's not the only thing in the cloud that you protect. You probably have the most comprehensive portfolio of SaaS application protection
Totally.
as well. So can we talk for just a quick minute about that? I mean, just
Totally.
what all applications do you currently support?
Totally. Phil, one of the things I would love to, for your listeners, one thing they should probably do while they're listening here, put a pause in the podcast for like 5 seconds, and then think for yourself for a minute. Just write down on paper saying how many SaaS applications your company actually has. Just take a guess, right? Or guess, or if you already know it, that's fantastic. Because I'll tell you, most people, I'll probably pause. Hopefully, people are thinking already. So let's. If you think about it, most people, when they think of how many SaaS applications, they say, I'll tell you a real story, right? I was talking to a friend of mine who's a CIO for a healthcare company. I called them one day as we were launching the solution. I said, like, hey, do you know how many SaaS you're using? This is the true thing. He just told me, I was like, probably 5 or so. I said, wow, man, you really control your company's SaaS. He said, then he just started thinking. He said, "Oh, you know what? For my HR, we use ADP. For scanning, we use this software. For my this one XYZ." By the time within the next 3 to 5 minutes, he remembered at least 13 other SaaS he was using. I didn't say anything, right? Him rattling off on his top of mind because most people then said, "Wow, that's true. I use a lot of SaaS," which is true. On an average, the number of SaaS a company actually has is 217 SaaS. There are some recent numbers which are even much higher. That's people, when we first saw our number like almost 2 years ago, when we initially did our thing, it was like 150 or something. And we said, "Oh, that's too bad. That's not probably true." Then we said, like, guys, why don't we survey ourselves? Even a young company like us, at that time, we had over 75 SaaS applications, right? It's just a not documented thing.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy, mind boggling. And one of the things, I was talking to a large storage company, a friend of mine, and he had 600 SaaS applications, 600 plus SaaS applications. That's the reality of people use, right? And to your point, which you said, Phil, most people use SaaS, and people think SaaS because SaaS is software as a service running on the cloud. People magically assumed it's protected. As you know, there's no magic. You got to have some reality, right? And the thing is that the SaaS vendors do a fantastic job of keeping the applications up. They do an excellent job. In general, very, very good. But one of the things is that imagine you as a user, when you delete something from your application, the SaaS vendor does not know it's a good delete or a bad delete. It's a delete, they'll delete it, right? Or you change something, a good change or a bad change that's there. Imagine that's you. If you are a bad actor, again, the SaaS does not know it's a good actor or a bad actor. Very hard to detect, right? That's why the SaaS vendors do a great job of keeping the applications up. At the end of the day, the data is the customer's responsibility. Yeah, again, it's probably preaching to the core. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, we talk a lot about it, but customers are still learning about shared responsibility. And so every cloud provider, every SaaS vendor, they have some version of a shared responsibility model. And at the end of the day, the data portion, what you store in their SaaS, is the customer's responsibility. It's your responsibility. And so the need for SaaS backup is absolutely there. It's very clear. But to your point, a lot of customers don't know what they have. So you have a great solution around this. For listeners, go out to XenTegra.com/HYCU, HYCU. You can get a little bit of information about this. It's a tool called rGraph. And Subbiah, why don't you tell us what rGraph is?
Totally. So as we said earlier, as Phil and I were talking about, customers have a large number of SaaS. Half the time is that they don't know what they actually have. So that's one of the reasons we said, why don't we provide this? It's a free service called rGraph. You just sign up for our service and you turn on, either if you have AD or Okta, which is like 98% of the customers use anyway. So if you turn it on, the system will go and discover all of your SaaS applications and show you an entire visual. It will automatically scan your entire estate, get all of your SaaS applications, SaaS, PaaS, DBaaS, IaaS, all the AAS as a service, anything you take it. It'll discover all of them and show you in a visual fashion, auto-categorize them by different departments, because over time we have learned how customers typically keep it. Again, your organization could be different. You can always change it, no big deal, but we'll automatically auto-categorize it. And then what we also do is that tell you what's protected and not protected. All this is, we don't charge for it. It's part of our graph. You can turn on, it's a free service, try it out. If you don't like it, you can turn it off, no big deal. But that is something there because it allows you to get a full visual of what you have. Because this goes back to which, for example, the Bain Capital CISO, Mark Sutton tells, he says, it's a logical thing, right? You can't protect what you can't see, right? And half the time it's just knowing what you actually have. Especially imagine as a CISO, your biggest worry is that what's your threat landscape? What are the potential points of vulnerability? And that's where understanding it and allows you to get your entire picture with your R graph. And it's, again, a free service. People can turn it on and use it.
Yeah. Discovery is the first step for 100% sure. And being able to see what's there is easy. You also make it easy to make the next step, which is to protect it. So from within our graph, you can also subscribe and protect all those services. Totally. So I do want to just highlight some of the services because you guys have an incredible number of SaaS services that you protect. If off the top of my head, it's kind of a pop quiz time. I know that there's Salesforce, there's Jira, there's all of the Okta. Yeah, so Azure ID or Azure AD. You've got other big platforms as well.
Totally. I'll add to what you said, Phil. I mean, the key thing is that, there are like more than 75% of the customers use some form of Atlassian solution, which people talk about, what do you mean Atlassian solution? Either a Jira or a Confluence or a JSM or Trello, and so many of them, right? HYCU has the broadest coverage. It's not about us, it's about the customer, right? Protecting your data is so critical. And because if you think about Jira, that's your company's life. Or like the other thing, too, you were saying the pop quiz thing, GitLab, GitHub, look at all of that stuff. That's where all your source code IP is, right? If you ever lose your GitLab or GitHub, man, your company's IP is gone, right? You don't want to do that. Being able to protect all of that is very, very critical. It's very simple. Discover it. If you have the need, right there, it's in a marketplace, you can turn it on and then protect.
Yeah.
So that's a list of SaaS. I mean, and the good thing is that we talked about SaaS here. I want to add to what you were saying earlier, Phil, is that it is not about SaaS. It's all about also many of you using public cloud services like Google and Azure and AWS and so on. Each of these cloud services have hundreds of services. How do you protect them? Because they have configuration. For example, one of our customers has key management. People think, really, do you need to protect it? Imagine the configuration you put in key management. If you lose the configuration, you lose their entire thing. You have to keep your copies of that. Absolutely. In the public cloud. So that is something which is there. Again, very small stuff, but it's very, very important. It's a core, becomes part of your entire life cycle. So we strongly encourage you to do that thing.
Yeah, the thing that struck me is, I've seen other solutions. They cover maybe Google Apps, maybe M365, but this is comprehensive. This is a single platform that's covering 2 pages worth of different SaaS applications here on the website. We're showing it. If you happen to be watching on YouTube, you can see the full list of it. But you've got this list available out on your website. It definitely helps to have, again, a simplified approach, and wider coverage of your SaaS applications is going to lead itself towards that simplified approach.
Totally.
The other thing that's also happening, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago in Barcelona, repatriation is happening. And so you've got solutions for companies that are trying to bring their unstructured data back to Nutanix Unified Storage on-prem. What's going on in that space?
Sure, Phil. Just to add to what you were saying, right? I mean, like we talked about SaaS backup. One of the things about SaaS is that the data for customers' data is actually outside their infrastructure, right? And what's happening is many of the customers, especially in the financial area, financial and healthcare, or any compliance-oriented companies, are being asked to demonstrate that they have a copy of the data under a control.
Right.
But there are multiple choices here. You can actually, for example, people think, oh, what do you do? So we provide you a copy of the back using the backup. It's there. You can keep it in the public clouds. That's choice A. But the other alternative is to keep the data, which you have your Nutanix Unified Storage. Many of you are Nutanix customers, or like you can use a service like from XenTegra, where you can keep your copy of the data in the Nutanix Unified Storage, right? So it is not just backing up the unified storage, it's also being able to back up the data onto unified storage from the SaaS. And where this again becomes valuable to customers, now you have a copy of the data outside of your SaaS. This is, I'll tell you a true instances. People might say, why do I need to keep it like that? One of the large vendor suppliers of SaaS, about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, had an outage in one part of the United States. This is a true story. They were down for 8 days in that one region, not across the board, not of the worldwide they were running, but in that one region they were out for 8 days because there was some problem there. And a small number of customers also lost their data. I'm not trying to create fear here, but it's a reality. It happens. Bad things do happen, right? It's Murphy's Law.
Absolutely.
And when that happens, you want to be able to have a copy so we can quickly up and running. And it's again, people might say this is not in addition to your human errors. We are humans, or what they call it, the error is human. So we do make mistakes, that's there. But in addition to this one, there is also the disaster aspect of it. There are bad things happen, you should be able to bring it up. That's an important aspect. So we strongly encourage customers to have a copy outside of your SaaS. If not us, please go with somebody else, but please do keep a copy of it just for your own safety. At least your business critical system have to have it. Our recommendation would be to actually keep in systems like Nutanix Unified Storage, which is highly resilient, and you can actually keep in your control. So that is something there. This is something new we introduced. Traditionally, it used to be only in the cloud. Now we can keep it local. Where is this important for people who are very sensitive about their data? And also some of the new, I don't know, people are familiar with a thing called NIS2, 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 and DORA, and there are some compliance regulations coming up, especially if your company has operations in Europe and things like that. It becomes a lot more critical. That mandates you have a copy of your data somewhere, and we can help you with something like that here.
Yeah, I know for anyone in Europe, the new compliance rules are pretty stringent. You know, data locality has always been sort of a topic of concern for European operations, or even in Great Britain, I guess, not technically part of the EU anymore after Brexit. So, you know, the locality is one of those things, in addition to what you're protecting, you know, where you can protect it, where the data lives within region is another huge concern. But the compliance rules just become more and more stringent. Unified storage from Nutanix, as you said, is really scalable. It's also pretty cost effective. You know, what we're finding working with customers is you can use in-region S3 like a Wasabi or someone like that, but you can also a lot of times store it on object store in your own facility at a much better price point. And, you know, economics are economics, right? You know, you can't beat the value sometimes if you already have your own colo and space. You know, for me,
Phil, one other thing I want to add to, sorry, Phil, I just want to add to
one
other thing. One other thing I want to add to what you were saying, Phil. The key thing is that a lot of times you buy a system, there might be a little extra capacity, things like that in different parts. The good thing is that's the good beauty of Nutanix systems, right? Once you have it, you can actually use for different purposes, different parts of the data.
Right.
So you can actually leverage start with your existing infrastructure. As you grow, you can always add more. And that's the beauty, which I think really helps.
Well, and the other thing I was going to say is object store used to be really difficult, right? That was the biggest problem for a lot of customers was on-site object store was expensive, it was complicated, but the economics and the form factors for object store have changed. We're talking about unified storage here with Nutanix. It's a lot simpler to operate an NUS cluster, objects within a Nutanix cluster. So that's also changing and helping drive adoption, I think, is the fact that you're getting this in a simplified form. So as you kind of look back at what you've done as a company in the last decade, you know, the story is pretty simple, right? Simplified, right? And
Yes.
scalable, and then a lot of customer choice. So in that way, it's very similar to what listeners hear from us talking about with the Nutanix story. Um, there's a lot of shared experience, shared DNA between, I think, your two companies. A lot of close
Totally.
collaboration too, it sounds like.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I'll probably throw in a different thing. As some people, different people, you can look at different hypervisors and choose which one to use, things like that. Obviously, with Nutanix, you have multiple choice. And as you between platforms, you have choice too. And that is something we can actually help customers as you move between some of these things. And let's say you want to take one of your other hypervisors and move it to Nutanix, things like that, we can actually help it. And there are some customers, for some variety of business reasons, have to take some workload from some of the on-prem infrastructure, go to the cloud, or repatriate, as you said, some of your cloud data back to on-prem.
Yeah.
All that we can actually help you with. Again, it goes back to doing it simple and keep giving you the choice, as you clearly put it, Phil. That's what we want to make sure it's there. And we would love for you to give it a try.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been fantastic just having the conversation. I know we're on the Nutanix podcast, so a lot of this has been central to Nutanix, but HYCU as a partner has been a great partner for us in this ecosystem. First to market in so many ways and so many of the different Nutanix technologies. And that's a huge part of it. Being part of that ecosystem is what makes it work for customers. There are other platforms out there that may not have that ecosystem support. So you've been a critical part of making this successful for so many of our customers.
Thank you.
It's fun to see where this is also developing. I frankly was not very familiar with HYCU coming into XenTegra 18 months ago. It's been really interesting to see how your portfolio covers so much of customers' environments. It's, as you said, a different take, a simplified, policy-driven take on protecting things. It's easier to see what is or isn't in compliance to your backup policies. It's a set it and forget it almost mentality.
Totally.
It's hugely helpful from an operations standpoint. So I really do appreciate you joining me today, Subbiah. It's been
Thank you very much for your
conversation. So if someone's looking for more information about HYCU, I would encourage you to reach out to one of our sales team. You can always reach the sales team using sales@XenTegra.com. We'll get you connected to our friends over at HYCU or Nutanix, and we would love to help you solve your problems. So for today's episode, I want to say thanks to Subbiah and the HYCU team for joining us. Thanks for taking some time to listen and spend time with us today, and we will see you or talk to you on the next episode here at Nutanix Weekly. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you very much for the time. Talk to you guys.